Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Alone in the room. The last chapter had left Brad teetering on the edge of a precipice, the weight of his decisions pressing down like a leaden shroud. He had faced his demons, the ghosts of his past swirling around him like a tempest, and yet, as he stood in the doorway of his own life, he felt more lost than ever. The echoes of his friend's voice still lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder of the choices he had made and the bridges he had burned. Now, in the dim light of his room, he was left to confront the aftermath of his actions, the silence amplifying the chaos within. Brad sat hunched over on the edge of his unmade bed, the sheets tangled like his thoughts. Crumpled papers littered the floor, remnants of half-formed ideas and abandoned dreams. Empty bottles of cheap whiskey lined the nightstand, their labels peeling, a testament to nights spent drowning out the noise of his own mind. The air was thick with the stale scent of alcohol and regret, a suffocating reminder of the life he had built. Or rather, the life he had let slip through his fingers. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the dark, abstract art that adorned the walls. Each piece seemed to pulse with a life of its own, mirroring the turmoil that churned within him. Swirls of black and deep crimson danced across the canvas, evoking a sense of chaos that resonated with his own feelings of despair. It was as if the very walls were closing in, the art a reflection of his chaotic thoughts, an oppressive atmosphere that suffocated any flicker of hope. Brad ran a hand through his disheveled hair, the weight of isolation pressing down on him like a physical force. He had always been a solitary figure, but now, in this moment, the loneliness felt like a living entity, wrapping around him, squeezing tighter with each passing second. He longed for connection, for someone to pull him from the depths of his self-imposed exile, but the thought of reaching out felt like an insurmountable task. What would he say? How could he explain the mess he had made of his life? The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside, a reminder that life continued beyond these four walls. He could hear the faint sound of laughter from a group of friends passing by, their joy a stark contrast to the heaviness that enveloped him. It was a cruel reminder of what he had lost, of the friendships he had let slip away in his pursuit of something he could never quite grasp. He picked up a crumpled piece of paper from the floor, smoothing it out against his thigh. It was a poem he had started, the words bleeding onto the page in a desperate attempt to articulate his feelings. But as he read through the lines, he felt a wave of frustration wash over him. The words felt hollow, inadequate to express the depth of his despair. He tossed the paper aside, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing in the stillness. God, what have I done? He muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, a haunting refrain that he couldn't escape. He had made choices that had led him here, to this moment of reckoning, and the weight of those choices felt like a noose tightening around his throat. As he sat there, the shadows deepening around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was a sensation that crept up his spine, a chill that settled in the pit of his stomach. He glanced toward the window, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the empty street illuminated by the flickering glow of a street lamp. Get a grip, Brad, he scolded himself, shaking his head as if to dispel the creeping paranoia. But the isolation was a breeding ground for his insecurities, and the longer he sat in the dim light, the more he felt the walls closing in. He stood abruptly, the movement sending a jolt of energy through his body. He needed to do something. Anything. To break the cycle of despair. He paced the small room, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight, the sound a reminder of the life that had once thrived here. Memories flooded back, moments of laughter and camaraderie that now felt like distant echoes. Why did I push them away? He asked aloud, his voice tinged with bitterness. He could almost hear their voices in his mind, the laughter of friends who had once filled this space with warmth and light. But he had chosen solitude, convinced that it was better to be alone than to risk the pain of connection. As he moved to the window, he pulled back the curtain, the fabric heavy and worn. The street below was empty now, the laughter faded into the night. He leaned against the cool glass, staring out into the darkness, searching for something. Anything that might pull him back from the brink. Maybe it is not too late, he whispered, though the words felt like a fragile hope, easily shattered by the weight of his reality. He could still reach out, still mend the frayed connections that had once meant everything to him. But the thought of vulnerability sent a shiver down his spine. What if they didn't want him back? What if he had burned those bridges beyond repair? The thought gnawed at him, a persistent ache that refused to fade. He turned away from the window, the darkness outside mirroring the turmoil within. He needed to confront his demons, to face the choices that had led him here. But the thought of doing so felt insurmountable, a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. He sank back onto the bed, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like a physical force. The room felt smaller, the shadows creeping closer, and he closed his eyes, willing himself to find some semblance of peace. But the silence was deafening, and the chaos within him roared to life, drowning out any flicker of hope. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence like a lifeline. He reached for it, his heart racing as he saw the name on the screen. Maya. A rush of emotions flooded through him, a mix of longing and fear. She had been his closest friend, the one person who had seen him at his best and worst. But their friendship had frayed, the distance between them growing as he spiraled deeper into his own darkness. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. What could he say? How could he explain the mess he had made of his life? But as the phone buzzed again, a sense of urgency washed over him. He couldn't ignore her any longer. With a deep breath, he tapped the screen, opening the message. Hey, Brad. Just checking in. I miss you. Let me know if you want to talk. The words felt like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The Descent. Brad sat hunched over in the dim light of his room, the shadows stretching like fingers across the walls, grasping at the remnants of his sanity. The previous night had been a blur of empty bottles and crumpled papers, remnants of a mind that had spiraled into chaos. He could still hear the echoes of laughter from the bar down the street, a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped him now. It was a silence that felt heavy, as if the very air was saturated with his regrets and unfulfilled dreams. The dark, abstract art on the walls seemed to pulse with life, mocking him with its chaotic beauty, a reflection of his own turbulent thoughts. As he stared at the ceiling, the paint peeling like the layers of his own psyche, memories began to flood his mind. Faces of women who had once filled his life with light, now reduced to mere specters of what could have been. Each relationship had ended in a way that felt like a betrayal, a reminder of his inadequacies. He could still hear Sarah's voice, soft yet firm, as she told him she needed more than he could give. "You're too lost in your own darkness, Brad," she had said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't be your light anymore." The thought of her left a bitter taste in his mouth, and he clenched his fists, feeling the sharp edges of the crumpled papers beneath him. It was easier to drown in the memories than to confront the reality of his loneliness. He reached for the small baggie tucked away in the corner of his desk, the contents glimmering like a siren's call. "Just a little," he whispered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. The thought of escape was intoxicating, a fleeting promise of relief from the relentless ache in his chest. He poured the powder onto the small mirror he used as a makeshift table, the surface reflecting his haggard face back at him. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, swirling around him like a tempest, whispering his darkest fears. Do it, they hissed, their voices a cacophony of doubt and despair. You know you want to. With a shaky hand, he prepared the line, his heart racing as he leaned in closer. The world around him faded, the oppressive silence replaced by a rush of adrenaline. He inhaled sharply, the substance burning his nostrils, a sharp reminder of the reality he was trying to escape. For a moment, everything felt lighter, the weight of his existence lifting as he surrendered to the high. But as the euphoria washed over him, it was quickly followed by a familiar darkness. The room transformed into a nightmarish landscape, the walls closing in as the shadows began to dance. They twisted and turned, morphing into figures that taunted him with their laughter, their eyes glinting with malice. Look at you, one of them sneered, its voice dripping with disdain. You think this will save you? You're just a coward hiding from the truth. Brad's heart raced, panic clawing at his throat. Shut up, he muttered, but the shadows only laughed harder, their voices echoing in his mind. He stumbled back, the high fading as quickly as it had come, leaving him gasping for breath. Why can't you just let go? Another shadow whispered, its tone almost sympathetic. You're not meant for this world. You're too broken. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. The shadows were relentless, each word a dagger that pierced through the fragile veil of his sanity. He felt the walls closing in, the air thick with despair. Brad. A voice broke through the chaos, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of light. It was Mia, his neighbor, her voice laced with concern. Are you okay? He blinked, the shadows retreating slightly as her presence anchored him to reality. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, wide with worry, searched his face for answers. Yeah, I'm fine, he lied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. Just working on some stuff. Mia stepped inside, her gaze flicking to the mess around him. It looks like you're working on a disaster, she said, her tone teasing but her eyes serious. You need to take a break, Brad. You can't keep doing this to yourself. He shrugged, the weight of her concern pressing down on him. I'm fine, he repeated, but the words felt hollow. Fine isn't a feeling, she countered, crossing her arms. You look like you haven't slept in days. You can't keep hiding in here. Her words struck a chord, and for a moment, he felt the urge to confess, to spill the darkness that had taken root in his heart. But the fear of vulnerability held him back, a tight knot in his chest. Instead, he deflected, his voice sharper than he intended. What do you want, Mia? I'm not in the mood for a lecture. Her expression softened, and she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I want to help you, Brad. You don't have to go through this alone. The sincerity in her eyes made his heart ache, and he felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crack. I don't need help, he insisted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Everyone needs help sometimes, she replied gently, her gaze unwavering. You don't have to pretend with me. For a fleeting moment, he considered letting her in, sharing the weight of his despair. But the shadows loomed large in his mind, reminding him of the pain that came with connection. I'm just tired, he finally admitted, the confession slipping out before he could stop it. Mia's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. Tired of what? He hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Tired of feeling like this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Tired of being alone. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Mia stepped closer, her hand reaching out as if to bridge the gap between them. "You're not alone, Brad. You have me." But the shadows stirred again, whispering doubts that clawed at his resolve. "You don't know what you're asking for," he warned, his voice low. "I'm not someone you want in your life." "Maybe I want to be in your life," she countered, her tone firm. "Maybe I see something in you that you can't see in yourself." He shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "You don't understand." Chapter 3. The Encounter. The dim light of Brad's room had become a familiar prison, its oppressive shadows wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. Crumpled papers littered the floor, remnants of half-formed thoughts and abandoned dreams. Empty bottles stood sentinel on his desk, their glass surfaces reflecting the flickering light of his computer screen, a ghostly reminder of the nights spent in solitude. He had spent hours lost in the labyrinth of his mind, replaying the echoes of past relationships, each memory a dagger that twisted deeper into his heart. The walls, adorned with dark, abstract art, seemed to pulse with his chaotic thoughts, mirroring the turmoil within. It was a night like any other, yet something in the air felt charged, as if the universe was conspiring to change the course of his life. With a heavy sigh, Brad pushed himself off the chair, the creaking wood beneath him sounding like a lament. He needed to escape, to breathe in something other than the stale air of regret and despair. The thought of the local bar, a dimly lit sanctuary for lost souls, flickered in his mind. He grabbed his jacket, the fabric worn and frayed, and stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting him like a splash of cold water. The bar was alive with a cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the silence he had left behind. As he entered, the familiar scent of spilled beer and cheap cologne enveloped him, a bittersweet reminder of countless nights spent in search of connection. He made his way to the bar, the polished wood cool beneath his fingertips, and ordered a drink, hoping to drown the remnants of his thoughts in amber liquid. It was then that he saw her. Lila sat at the far end of the bar, her presence magnetic. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face that seemed to glow even in the dim light. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her figure, accentuating the curves that made his heart race. But it was her eyes that captivated him. Deep pools of understanding that seemed to pierce through the layers of his despair. Brad felt an inexplicable pull towards her, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the insecurities that threatened to surface. With each step he took, the noise of the bar faded into a distant hum, and all that existed was the space between them. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Lila looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not at all. I could use some company." As he settled onto the stool beside her, Brad felt a spark of electricity in the air, a connection that felt both thrilling and terrifying. They exchanged pleasantries, their conversation flowing effortlessly, as if they had known each other for years. Lila spoke with a passion that ignited something within him, her laughter ringing like music in his ears. "What brings you here tonight?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. Brad hesitated, the weight of his truth pressing down on him. "Just trying to escape," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Life can feel pretty heavy sometimes." Lila nodded, her expression shifting to one of understanding. "I get that. Sometimes it feels like the world is just too much to bear." Her words resonated with him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. They shared stories, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the bar, creating a bubble of intimacy that shielded them from the chaos around them. But as the night wore on, Brad's insecurities began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of his newfound connection. "What about you?" he asked, trying to divert the conversation. "What brings you to a place like this?" Lila's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of something darker crossing her features. "Just looking for a break from reality, I suppose. It can be overwhelming sometimes." Brad felt a pang of recognition. "Yeah, I know that feeling all too well." But as they continued to talk, the shadows of his past loomed larger, and he found himself retreating into the familiar territory of self-doubt. "You probably think I'm just some loser who can't get his life together," he blurted out, the words tumbling from his lips before he could stop them. Lila's brow furrowed, her expression shifting from understanding to confusion. "That's not true. Everyone has their struggles, Brad. You're not alone in this." But the moment the words left her mouth, Brad felt a surge of anger. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about my life." The words were sharper than he intended, slicing through the fragile atmosphere they had created. Lila recoiled slightly, her eyes widening in surprise. "I was just trying to help," she said softly, her voice tinged with hurt. Brad's heart raced, the adrenaline of the argument fueling his frustration. "Help? You think you can just waltz in here and understand my pain? You don't know what it is like to feel this lost." The bar around them faded into a blur as the tension between them escalated. Lila's expression hardened, her vulnerability replaced by a steely resolve. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't know your pain. But I do know what it is like to feel alone, to feel like you're drowning in your own thoughts." Brad's breath hitched, the anger dissipating as he saw the truth in her eyes. "I didn't mean to." "Maybe you should think before you speak," she interrupted, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I came here to escape too, and I thought I found someone who understood. But maybe I was wrong." With that, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the charged atmosphere. Brad felt a wave of panic wash over him, the realization that he might lose her hitting him like a physical blow. "Lila, wait," he called out, desperation creeping into his voice. But she was already walking away, her silhouette disappearing into the crowd, leaving him alone in the storm of his emotions. The bar felt colder without her presence, the laughter and chatter now a dull roar that grated against his ears. He buried his face in his hands, frustration and regret swirling within him like a tempest. Why had he let his insecurities take over? Why had he pushed away the one person who seemed to understand? As he sat there, the weight of his choices pressing down on him, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe he could find her, apologize, and somehow mend the fragile connection they had forged. With renewed determination, he pushed himself off the stool and made his way through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the room, searching for the familiar figure of Lila, but she was nowhere to be found. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The breaking point. The shadows in Brad's room had deepened since Lila stormed out, leaving behind a silence that felt like a suffocating blanket. The remnants of their argument echoed in his mind, a cacophony of hurtful words and unspoken truths. He could still see the flash of hurt in her eyes, the way her lips trembled as she turned away, and the door slamming shut behind her had felt like the final nail in the coffin of his already fractured heart. The dim light flickered overhead, casting erratic shapes on the walls, and the crumpled papers scattered across the floor mirrored the chaos in his mind. Tonight, he was consumed by a rage that felt both foreign and familiar, a tempest brewing within him that begged for release. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and the faint, lingering odor of smoke from the last time he had lit a cigarette. He could almost taste the bitterness of regret on his tongue, and it made him sick. Brad's fingers twitched as he glanced at the rake propped against the corner of the room, its wooden handle worn and splintered. It was a mundane tool, but in his current state, It transformed into something sinister, a weapon against the demons that clawed at his insides. He rose from the floor, the weight of his despair pulling him down like an anchor, and grabbed the rake, feeling its cool surface against his palm. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse and raw. But the question lingered, unanswered, as he swung the rake in a wide arc, imagining it slicing through the air with the same ease that his thoughts sliced through his sanity. In his mind, he conjured a scene. A confrontation with those who had wronged him. Faces flashed before him. The ex-girlfriends who had left him, the friends who had turned their backs, the strangers who had laughed at his pain. Each one was a ghost, a specter of his past that haunted him relentlessly. He envisioned them standing before him, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear as he wielded the rake like a sword, ready to exact his revenge. "Brad, what are you doing?" he whispered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. But the fantasy was intoxicating, a heady mix of power and release. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, igniting a fire that had long been extinguished. As he paced the room, the shadows danced around him, whispering sweet nothings that twisted into venomous taunts. "You're nothing without them," they hissed. "You'll always be alone." The words stung, and he gritted his teeth, fighting against the tide of despair that threatened to pull him under. He dropped the rake, the clatter echoing in the silence, and sank back onto the floor, his back against the wall. The coolness of the wood pressed against his skin, grounding him in a reality that felt increasingly distant. He closed his eyes, the darkness behind his eyelids swirling with images of Lila. Her laughter, her fierce spirit, the way she had looked at him as if she could see the man he desperately wanted to be. "Why did I push her away?" he murmured, the question hanging in the air like a ghost. The answer eluded him, slipping through his fingers like sand. He had been so afraid of being vulnerable, of letting someone in, that he had lashed out, driven by insecurities that clawed at him relentlessly. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as he grappled with his emotions. He could hear the distant sounds of the city outside. Cars honking, people laughing, life continuing on without him. It was a stark reminder of his isolation, a reminder that he was a mere spectator in a world that seemed to move on without him. Suddenly, the phone buzzed on the floor beside him, jolting him from his reverie. He picked it up, his heart racing as he saw Lila's name flash across the screen. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. What could he possibly say? "Hey," he finally answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brad," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "I need to talk to you." The air crackled with tension, and he could hear the faint sound of her breathing on the other end. "I know I messed up," he said, his heart pounding in his chest. "I didn't mean what I said. I just..." "Stop," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "You need to listen to me. I can't keep doing this. You push me away, and then you expect me to just come back like nothing happened." "I know," he replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to handle this. You make me feel things I'm not ready to face." There was a pause, and he could almost hear her weighing his words, searching for sincerity. "Brad, I want to help you, but you have to let me in. You can't keep shutting me out." He felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of her words crashing over him like a wave. "I'm scared, Lila," he confessed, the admission spilling from his lips before he could stop it. "I'm scared of being hurt again. I've lost so much already." "Then let me help you," she urged, her voice softening. "You don't have to go through this alone." The sincerity in her voice pierced through the fog of his despair, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a flicker of hope. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice trembling. I don't know if I deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance, Brad, she replied, her tone unwavering. You just have to take that first step. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in his chest. What if I mess it up again? Then we'll figure it out together, she said, her voice steady. But you have to try. You have to want it. As he sat there, the rake forgotten at his side, he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the breaking point that could either shatter him completely or set him free. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of her presence through the phone, and made a decision. Okay, he said, his voice stronger now. I want to try. I want to let you in. Good, she replied, relief flooding her voice. Let's meet. I'll be at the cafe on 5th in an hour. Please don't make me wait. I won't, he promised, a newfound determination coursing through him. As he hung up, the shadows in the room seemed to recede, the oppressive weight lifting ever so slightly. He stood up, the rake clattering to the floor. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. The Act. The room was a mausoleum of regret, a sanctuary for Brad's darkest thoughts. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and contorting like the memories that haunted him. He had spent the last few days in a haze, the remnants of his encounter with Lila replaying in his mind like a broken record. Her laughter, her piercing gaze, the way she had seemed to peel back the layers of his soul. All of it was a stark contrast to the isolation that now enveloped him. He had pushed her away, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. The emptiness that followed was suffocating, a weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. As he sat on the edge of his bed, the rake still clutched in his hand, Brad's thoughts spiraled further into darkness. The tool, once a mundane object, had transformed into a symbol of his rage, a weapon in the war he waged against himself. He imagined the sharp tines piercing the flesh of those who had wronged him. His father, the girls who had left him, the friends who had turned their backs. Each face morphed into a grotesque caricature, their laughter echoing in his mind like a taunt. Just a little more, he whispered to himself, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Just a little more pain. He closed his eyes, letting the visions wash over him. In his mind, he was a vengeful spirit, a specter of retribution. He could see it clearly. The scene unfolding in a dimly lit alley, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and despair. He was there, standing over his foes, the rake in his hands, the power coursing through him like electricity. He could feel their fear, their helplessness, and it sent a thrill through his veins. But as the fantasy deepened, a flicker of doubt crept in. Was this really who he was? The line between reality and fantasy blurred, and for a moment, he felt the cold grip of fear wrap around his heart. What if he crossed that line? What if the rage that simmered beneath the surface erupted into something uncontrollable? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and he opened his eyes, the room spinning slightly as he fought to regain his grip on reality. Get a grip, Brad, he muttered, shaking his head as if to dispel the darkness. But the shadows only deepened, whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. He could almost hear Lila's voice, soft and melodic, cutting through the chaos. You're better than this. But was he? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He had spent so long wallowing in his own misery, nurturing his anger like a pet. It was easier to blame others, to paint himself as the victim in a world that had conspired against him. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was the architect of his own destruction. With a sudden burst of energy, he hurled the rake across the room, watching as it clattered against the wall, the sound echoing in the silence. He stood up, pacing the small space, his heart racing. He needed to escape this prison of his own making, to break free from the chains of his despair. But where could he go? The world outside felt just as dark, just as unforgiving. His thoughts drifted back to Lila, the way she had looked at him with those piercing green eyes, as if she could see right through the facade he had built. She had offered him a glimpse of something more, something real, and he had thrown it away in a fit of rage. The memory stung, a fresh wound that refused to heal. He could still feel the warmth of her hand brushing against his, the electric connection that had sparked between them. It was a fleeting moment, but it had ignited something within him. A flicker of hope that now felt extinguished. "Damn it," he growled, running a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. He had to find her, to apologize, to explain. But what could he say? "I'm sorry for being a monster." The thought made him laugh bitterly, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. As he stood there, grappling with his emotions, the doorbell rang, slicing through the silence like a knife. He froze, heart pounding in his chest. Who could it be? The thought of facing anyone sent a wave of panic through him. But curiosity gnawed at him, urging him to answer. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and made his way to the door. Peering through the peephole, he was met with a familiar sight. Lila, standing on the other side, her hair damp from the rain, a concerned expression etched on her face. His heart raced, a mix of dread and hope flooding his veins. What was she doing here? Did she come to confront him, to tell him off for his outburst? Or was there a chance she had come to forgive him? He hesitated, the weight of his own insecurities pressing down on him. But as he watched her shift from one foot to the other, her eyes scanning the ground, he felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions any longer. With a shaky hand, he opened the door. "Lila," he breathed, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. "Brad," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "Can we talk?" The rain drizzled around them, a gentle backdrop to the storm brewing inside him. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter, the warmth of her presence flooding the cold, dark room. She looked around, taking in the chaos that surrounded him, and he felt a wave of shame wash over him. This was not the person he wanted her to see. "Sorry about the mess," he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I've been going through some stuff." "Yeah, I can see that," she replied, her gaze lingering on the scattered papers and empty bottles. "I was worried about you." Worried. The word felt foreign on his tongue, a concept he had long since abandoned. "Why would you be worried about me?" "Because I care, Brad," she said, her voice steady, but he could hear the tremor beneath it. "I know you're hurting, and I want to help." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Help. How could she possibly help him when he was so far gone? The thought of dragging her into his darkness felt selfish, but the flicker of hope ignited again, urging him to reach out. "I don't know if I can be helped," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've done some terrible things. Thought some terrible things." Lila stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, the weight of his confessions pressing down on him. "I've been fantasizing about." Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The Fall. In the dim light of his room, Brad had spiraled deeper into the abyss of his own making. The crumpled papers and empty bottles littered the floor like remnants of a life he no longer recognized. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that mirrored his chaotic thoughts. He had felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him, a suffocating blanket that stifled any flicker of hope. The night he met Lila had ignited something within him, a spark that quickly fizzled out in the wake of his insecurities and rage. Now, He was left with nothing but the echo of her departure, a haunting reminder of what could have been. As he sat in the corner of his room, the air thick with the stench of stale alcohol and regret, Brad's mind raced. He had indulged in drugs, seeking solace in their ephemeral embrace, but the high had long since faded, leaving him with a gnawing emptiness. The rake he had clutched earlier lay discarded on the floor, a symbol of his futile attempts to confront his demons. He felt like a puppet with severed strings, flailing in a void of despair. But tonight was different. A moment of clarity pierced through the fog of his mind, a fleeting thought that perhaps he could escape this torment. He stood up, swaying slightly as he tried to steady himself. The room spun, and he stumbled toward the door, desperate for fresh air, for a breath of life beyond these four walls. But fate had other plans. As he stepped forward, his foot caught on a spilled drink, the remnants of a long-forgotten party. Time slowed as he lost his balance, arms flailing in a desperate attempt to regain control. The world tilted, and he felt himself falling, the floor rushing up to meet him. The crack of his skull against the hardwood echoed in the silence, a sickening sound that reverberated through his body. Pain exploded in a fiery wave, and blood spilled from the gash on his head, pooling around him like a grotesque painting of his internal struggle. Lying there, the world began to blur and fade, and Brad found himself drifting into a surreal vision. His life flashed before his eyes, not in the form of coherent memories, but as a chaotic montage of moments. Faces, places, and feelings swirling together in a dizzying dance. He saw his mother's smile, warm and inviting, before it twisted into a frown of disappointment. He saw the laughter of friends, now distant echoes, replaced by the cold silence of solitude. He saw Lila, her eyes filled with understanding, then filled with hurt as their argument replayed in his mind. "Why can't you just let it go?" her voice echoed, sharp and accusatory. "You're pushing me away." Brad's heart raced as he relived the moment, the weight of his own insecurities crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had pushed her away, hadn't he? He had let his demons take control, and now he was paying the price. The blood continued to seep from his head, a stark reminder of his fragility, both physically and emotionally. In this surreal state, he felt detached from his body, as if he were watching himself from a distance. The pain was there, but it was muted, overshadowed by a growing sense of clarity. He could see the threads of his life unraveling, each one representing a choice he had made, a path he had taken. The darker threads were woven tightly, binding him to his past mistakes, while the lighter ones flickered like stars in a night sky, representing the moments of joy and connection he had once cherished. "Brad," a voice called out, soft and melodic, cutting through the haze. It was Lila, her figure emerging from the shadows, ethereal and haunting. "You need to wake up. You can't stay here." He wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and feel the warmth of her presence, but he was trapped in this liminal space, caught between life and death. "I don't know how," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have to choose," she replied, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of compassion and sorrow. "You can't keep running from yourself. You have to face it." As her words sank in, Brad felt a surge of emotion, a tidal wave of regret and longing crashing over him. He thought of all the times he had pushed people away, of the walls he had built around his heart. He thought of Lila, of the connection they had shared, and how he had let his fears sabotage it. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was the architect of his own destruction. With a sudden jolt, he was pulled back into his body, the pain in his head sharp and insistent. He blinked against the dim light, the room coming into focus. Blood pooled around him, a stark contrast against the dark wood floor, and he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had fallen, Yes, but perhaps this fall was not the end. Perhaps it was a chance to rise again, to confront the darkness that had consumed him for so long. With a groan, he pushed himself up, wincing at the pain that shot through his skull. He could feel the warmth of the blood trickling down his face, a reminder of his vulnerability. But beneath that pain, there was a flicker of determination igniting within him. He had to face his demons, to confront the ghosts of his past that haunted him. As he staggered to his feet, he caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection staring back at him was a stranger. Disheveled hair, bloodied forehead, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. He didn't recognize this man, but he knew he had to change. He had to fight for the life he wanted, for the connections he craved. The door creaked open, and a rush of cool air filled the room, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Brad stepped outside, the world around him alive with the sounds of the night. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, and the soft patter of raindrops beginning to fall. He closed his eyes, letting the cool droplets wash over him, cleansing him of the darkness that had clung to him for so long. But as he stood there, a sense of urgency gripped him. He needed to find Lila. He needed to apologize, to explain the turmoil that had consumed him. He couldn't let her slip away without trying to make things right. With newfound determination, he took a deep breath and set off into the night, the rain mingling with the blood on his face, a testament to his struggle and his resolve. As he walked, the streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting the chaos of his thoughts. He replayed their last conversation in his mind, the hurt in her eyes, the anger in his voice. He had been so afraid of being vulnerable, of letting someone in, that he had pushed her away. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. Brad awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of machines, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed him just days before. The last thing he remembered was the cold, hard floor of his room, the sharp pain of his head colliding with reality, and the dark fantasies that had spiraled out of control. Now, as he blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, the weight of his actions pressed down on him like a lead blanket. He was alive, but at what cost? The room was small and claustrophobic, the walls painted a dull shade of beige that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. A single window offered a glimpse of the outside world, but the view was obscured by the heavy bars that reminded him of his confinement. Not just here, but in his own mind. He turned his head slowly, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through his skull, and caught sight of the IV drip hanging beside him, a lifeline tethering him to a reality he had tried so desperately to escape. "Good to see you awake, Mr. Thompson," a voice broke through the haze. A doctor stood at the foot of his bed, her expression a mix of professionalism and concern. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to pierce through the fog of his confusion. "You gave us quite a scare." Brad swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in his throat. "What happened?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. The doctor adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady. "You slipped and fell in your apartment. You sustained a concussion and several lacerations on your head. We had to stitch you up." She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle in the air between them. "But that's not all, is it?" He felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a mix of shame and anger bubbling beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew. "Your blood tests came back positive for several substances," she continued, her tone gentle but firm. "You've been using drugs, Brad. This isn't just a physical injury. It is a cry for help." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He wanted to deny it, to lash out, but the truth was undeniable. He had been drowning in his own despair, and the drugs had felt like a lifeline, however toxic. I didn't mean to. I know, she interrupted softly. But you need to understand the severity of your situation. You're not just hurting yourself. You're isolating yourself from the people who care about you. Brad turned his gaze to the window, the world outside moving on without him. He felt more isolated than ever, the walls of the hospital room closing in around him. I don't have anyone, he muttered, the bitterness in his voice palpable. Is that really true? She pressed, her eyes searching his. What about Lila? The mention of her name sent a jolt through him, a mix of longing and regret. He had pushed her away, driven by his own insecurities and fears. She left, he said, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. Did she leave, or did you push her away? The doctor's question hung in the air, challenging him to confront the truth he had been avoiding. I don't know, he admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know how to connect with people. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. The doctor nodded, her expression softening. It's okay to feel lost, Brad. But you have to take responsibility for your actions. You can't keep running from your pain. You need to face it. Her words resonated deep within him, stirring something he had buried beneath layers of anger and self-loathing. He had been so consumed by his own darkness that he had failed to see the light that Lila had offered. What if I can't? He whispered, the vulnerability in his voice raw and exposed. You can, she replied firmly. But it starts with acknowledging your pain and seeking help. You're not alone in this, even if it feels that way. As she spoke, a flicker of hope ignited within him, battling against the shadows that had taken root in his heart. Perhaps there was a way out of this darkness, a path toward healing. But the thought of facing his demons was terrifying. The doctor glanced at her watch, her expression shifting to one of urgency. I have to go, but I want you to think about what I said. I'll arrange for a counselor to speak with you later. You need to start processing what you've been through. With that, she turned to leave, but Brad called out, wait. He felt a surge of desperation, a need to grasp onto something real. What if I don't want to talk about it? She paused, looking back at him with a mixture of empathy and resolve. Then you'll stay trapped in this cycle. But if you're willing to try, I promise it will be worth it. You deserve to heal, Brad. As the door clicked shut behind her, he was left alone with his thoughts, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He closed his eyes, allowing the darkness to envelop him once more, but this time, it felt different. There was a flicker of light, a possibility of change. Hours passed, the monotony of the hospital room broken only by the occasional shuffle of nurses and the distant sounds of beeping machines. Brad lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought of Lila, of the connection they had shared, and the way she had looked at him with understanding. He had pushed her away, but the thought of her lingered like a ghost, haunting him with what could have been. The door creaked open again, and this time, it was a nurse with a warm smile. How are you feeling? She asked, her voice soothing. Like I've been hit by a truck, he replied, attempting a weak smile. She chuckled softly, adjusting the IV drip. That's understandable. You've been through a lot. Just take it one day at a time. Is that what they tell you? He asked, his tone more bitter than he intended. Sometimes, she said, her expression turning serious. But it is true. Healing isn't a race. It's a journey, and it starts with small steps. Brad nodded, the nurse's words echoing in his mind. He had spent so long running from his pain, but perhaps it was time to confront it. What if I don't know where to start? He asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. Start by being honest with yourself, she replied, her gaze steady. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. You don't have to do this alone. As she finished adjusting the IV, Brad felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. He had been so consumed by his own darkness that he had forgotten the power of connection. Chapter 8. Chapter 8. The Return. The sterile scent of antiseptic still clung to Brad's skin as he stepped through the door of his apartment, the familiar creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. It had been a week since the accident, a week spent in the sterile confines of the hospital, where the only company had been the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses. He had returned home, but the darkness that had once felt like a heavy blanket now loomed like a storm cloud, more oppressive than ever. The walls of his apartment, once a canvas for his chaotic thoughts, now felt like a prison. The abstract art that had once inspired him now mocked his despair, the dark swirls and jagged lines reflecting the turmoil within. He dropped his bag on the floor, the thud reverberating through the stillness, and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his isolation settle around him like a shroud. He moved to the small kitchen, the fluorescent light flickering overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty bottles that lined the counter. Each one was a reminder of his failures, a testament to the nights spent drowning his sorrows in alcohol and drugs. He could still taste the bitterness of regret on his tongue, a flavor that lingered long after the last drop had been swallowed. As he leaned against the counter, his gaze fell on his phone, its screen cracked but still functional. He hesitated, his heart racing as he scrolled through his contacts. There it was. Lila. Her name glowed brightly against the darkness of his thoughts, a beacon of the connection he had so desperately craved. But the memory of their last encounter, the heated argument that had sent her storming out, flooded his mind. He could still hear her voice, sharp and accusing, cutting through the haze of his despair. "Why do you always push people away?" she had yelled, her eyes blazing with frustration. "You're not the only one hurting, Brad." He had wanted to scream back, to tell her that she didn't understand, that he was drowning in a sea of his own making. But instead, he had let his insecurities take over, pushing her away just as he had done with everyone else in his life. Now, staring at her name, he felt a pang of longing mixed with fear. What if she didn't want to hear from him? What if he had lost her for good? With a shaky breath, he put the phone down, the weight of indecision heavy in his chest. He couldn't bear the thought of reaching out only to be met with silence. Instead, he turned away, the suffocating atmosphere of the room closing in around him. He needed to escape, to breathe, but the walls felt like they were closing in, trapping him in a cycle of despair. He wandered into the living room, where the shadows danced along the walls, flickering like ghosts of his past. The furniture was arranged haphazardly, a reflection of his chaotic mind. He sank into the worn-out couch, the fabric rough against his skin, and closed his eyes, trying to block out the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. But they came flooding back, uninvited and relentless. He thought of the nights spent with Lila, her laughter ringing in his ears like a melody he couldn't forget. He remembered the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams, the passion that ignited within her as she shared her hopes for the future. It was a stark contrast to the darkness that enveloped him now, a reminder of everything he had lost. As he sat there, the silence of the room was broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside, a reminder that life continued beyond his four walls. He felt a flicker of anger rise within him, a desire to lash out at the world for its indifference. Why should he have to suffer alone while everyone else moved on with their lives? He stood abruptly, the couch creaking beneath him, and paced the room, his thoughts spiraling out of control. He could feel the familiar urge to numb the pain creeping back in, whispering sweet nothings in his ear. Just one drink, one hit, and everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the answer. It never had been. In a moment of clarity, He grabbed his phone again, his fingers hovering over Lila's name. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the fear of rejection battling with the desperate need for connection. He wanted to reach out, to apologize, to explain everything that had happened since their last encounter. But what if she didn't care? What if she had moved on? With a frustrated growl, he tossed the phone onto the couch and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension coil within him like a spring ready to snap. He needed to do something, anything, to break the cycle of despair that had taken hold of him. He moved to the window, the cool glass pressing against his forehead as he stared out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the buildings, but all he could see were the shadows creeping in, swallowing the light. He felt a pang of longing for the life he had once envisioned for himself, a life filled with love and laughter, not this suffocating darkness. Suddenly, a noise broke through his thoughts. A soft knock at the door. He turned, heart racing, unsure of who it could be. The sound echoed in the silence, a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he felt. He hesitated, the fear of facing anyone clawing at his insides, but curiosity won out. He opened the door slowly, bracing himself for whatever lay beyond. To his surprise, it was Lila. She stood there, her hair tousled by the wind, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The sight of her sent a jolt of electricity through him, a mix of hope and fear swirling in his chest. "Brad," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" His heart raced as he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The air felt charged with unspoken words, the tension between them palpable. He closed the door behind her, the click echoing in the silence, sealing them in this moment together. I didn't expect to see you," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. He could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them, a chasm that felt impossible to cross. "I know," she replied, her gaze flickering around the room, taking in the chaos that surrounded them. I wanted to check on you. After everything that happened." Brad swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "I'm okay," he lied, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Just trying to figure things out." Lila stepped closer, her eyes searching his, and he could see the concern etched on her face. "You're not okay, Brad. I can see that. You don't have to pretend with me." He felt a rush of vulnerability wash over him. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. The dim light of Brad's room flickered like a dying star, casting long shadows that danced across the walls, each one a reminder of his spiraling descent. The crumpled papers littering the floor bore witness to his chaotic thoughts, while empty bottles stood like sentinels of his despair. He had spent countless hours staring at the abstract art that adorned the walls, each brushstroke echoing the turmoil within him. The oppressive atmosphere felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating him as he wrestled with the ghosts of his past. Guilt and regret gnawed at him, whispering insidious thoughts that twisted his heart into knots. He had thought that hitting rock bottom would be the end of his suffering, but instead, it had become a launching pad for darker impulses. The memory of Lila lingered in his mind, a bittersweet reminder of the connection he had almost grasped before it slipped away. Her laughter, her understanding gaze, and the electric spark between them haunted him, a cruel taunt that only deepened his isolation. He had pushed her away, and now he was left with nothing but the echoes of his own failures. As the night deepened, Brad's mental state deteriorated further. The shadows in his room seemed to grow darker, more menacing, as if they were conspiring against him. He sat on the edge of his bed, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like a leaden shroud. The idea of ending it all crept into his mind, insidious and seductive. What if he could escape this relentless pain? What if he could silence the voices that tormented him? He picked up a pen, the ink flowing like blood onto the page as he began to write. The words poured out of him, raw and unfiltered, a final note that encapsulated his despair. "To whoever finds this," he wrote, his hand trembling as he bared his soul. "I'm sorry. I tried to fight, but the darkness is too strong. I don't want to hurt anymore." Each line felt like a confession, a release of the burdens he had carried for far too long. He wrote about his regrets, the relationships he had ruined, and the love he had chased away. The ink smudged under his tears, but he didn't care. This was his truth, and he needed to share it, even if it was just with the void. The room was silent, save for the sound of his breathing, which grew more ragged with each passing moment. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him as he contemplated his plan. It was simple, really. A way to escape the pain that had become his constant companion. He envisioned a world without him, a world where he wouldn't be a burden to anyone. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. But as he sat there, pen poised over the paper, a flicker of doubt crept in. What if there was still hope? What if he could find a way to claw his way back from the abyss? The memory of Lila's smile flashed in his mind, a beacon of light in his darkness. He could almost hear her voice, urging him to fight, to seek help. But the shadows whispered louder, drowning out her encouragement. "You're beyond saving," they hissed. "You've already lost." Brad's heart raced as he wrestled with the conflicting emotions swirling within him. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. He glanced around the room, taking in the remnants of his life. The crumpled papers, the empty bottles, the darkness that seemed to seep into every corner. It was a prison of his own making, and he was the only inmate. With a sudden burst of anger, he crumpled the note and threw it across the room. It landed amongst the debris, a testament to his turmoil. "No," he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let it end like this." He stood up, pacing the small confines of his room, the adrenaline coursing through him like a lifeline. He needed to confront the demons that had taken hold of him, to face the pain instead of running from it. He grabbed his phone, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. Lila. The thought of reaching out to her sent a jolt of fear through him. What if she rejected him again? What if she was better off without him? But deep down, he knew he couldn't face this alone. He needed her, even if it was just to hear her voice one last time. With trembling fingers, he typed out a message, his heart racing as he hit send. "Lila, I need to talk. Please." The words felt heavy, laden with desperation. He stared at the screen, willing her to respond, to pull him back from the edge. But as the seconds ticked by, the silence grew deafening. Doubt crept in again, wrapping around him like a vice. What if she didn't care? What if he had lost her for good? Just as he was about to throw the phone against the wall in frustration, it buzzed in his hand. His heart leapt as he saw her name flash across the screen. "I'm here. What's going on?" He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could he explain the depths of his despair? How could he articulate the darkness that had consumed him? "I don't know how to say this," he typed, his heart racing. "I've been struggling. I feel like I'm drowning." There was a pause, and he could almost hear her thoughts racing on the other side. "You're not alone, Brad. I'm here for you. Just talk to me." Her words were a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink. He felt the tears welling up again, but this time they were different. They were tears of relief, of hope. "I don't want to feel this way anymore," he confessed, his heart pounding in his chest. "I thought about ending it all." The response came almost immediately. "Please don't say that. You matter to me. You're worth fighting for." Brad's breath hitched as he read her words. The warmth of her concern wrapped around him like a comforting embrace, pushing back the shadows that threatened to engulf him. I don't know how to fight anymore, he admitted, his vulnerability laid bare. I feel so lost. Then let me help you find your way, she replied. We can do this together. Just take it one step at a time. In that moment, something shifted within him. The darkness that had loomed so large began to recede, replaced by a flicker of hope. He realized that perhaps he didn't have to face this battle alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the shadows. As they continued to talk, Brad felt the weight of his despair begin to lift. Lila's voice was a soothing balm, her words a reminder that he was not as alone as he had believed. They spoke late into the night. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. The final twist. The shadows in Brad's room seemed to stretch longer, darker, as he sat on the edge of his bed, the crumpled note in his hand feeling heavier than the weight of his despair. Just moments ago, he had been poised to end it all, the ink still fresh with his final thoughts, a desperate plea for understanding that would never reach anyone. The room, with its peeling paint and flickering light, felt like a tomb. A fitting place for the remnants of his shattered life. But then, as if summoned by the very darkness he had embraced, a knock echoed through the silence, jolting him from his thoughts. Brad. The voice was soft yet insistent, a melody that cut through the fog of his despair. It was Lila. His heart raced, a sudden surge of hope and dread intertwining. He had imagined this moment countless times, but never in the context of his impending decision. He hesitated, the note trembling in his grip. What would she say? Would she understand the depths of his pain, or would she turn away in disgust? Brad, please. I know you're in there, she called again, her voice laced with urgency. I've been looking for you. He stood, the note slipping from his fingers and fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. The door felt like a barrier between his two worlds. The one he had constructed from grief and isolation, and the one that Lila represented. A world of connection, of possibility. With a deep breath, he opened the door. Lila stood there, her hair tousled and her eyes wide with concern. She looked different, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders, but her presence was still a balm to his frayed nerves. I was worried, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I thought something terrible had happened. Brad swallowed hard, the words lodged in his throat. I didn't think you'd come back. I had to, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't just leave things the way they were. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, a tension that felt both electric and suffocating. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close and drown in the warmth of her presence, but the shadows of his past loomed large, reminding him of the chaos he had created. I'm not the person you think I am, he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his truth. Lila stepped closer, her gaze piercing through his defenses. Then show me who you really are, Brad. I want to understand. He hesitated, the memories of his darkest moments flooding back. The drugs, the violence, the spiraling thoughts that had led him to the brink. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I'm broken. Everyone has cracks, she said, her tone gentle yet firm. It's how we let the light in that matters. Her words hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of his despair. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt an unsettling shift, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Doubt? He shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me, she urged, her voice steady. I'm here, Brad. I'm not going anywhere. The sincerity in her eyes pierced through his defenses, and he found himself spilling the truth. The drugs, the fantasies of violence, the note he had just written. With each confession, he felt the weight of his shame lift, but as he spoke, he noticed a change in her expression. The concern was still there, but it was mingled with something else. Something darker. "Why didn't you reach out to me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I could have helped you. I didn't want to drag you into my mess," he replied, the guilt gnawing at him. "I thought you'd be better off without me." Lila stepped back, her eyes narrowing as if she were seeing him for the first time. "You think I'm just going to walk away? That I'd leave you to drown in this? I thought you'd understand," he said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't know what it is like to feel this way." "Maybe I do," she shot back, her voice rising. "Maybe I've been fighting my own demons, too." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and charged. "What do you mean?" he asked, his heart racing. "What are you hiding?" For a moment, her expression faltered, and he could see the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. "It's not about me right now, Brad," she said, her voice softening. "It's about you. You need to confront your pain, not just push it away." "Confront it how?" he asked, desperation creeping into his tone. "By wallowing in it. By letting it consume me." "No," she said, stepping closer again, her eyes fierce. "By facing it head on. By understanding that you're not alone in this fight." As she spoke, a flicker of recognition ignited within him. He had been so consumed by his own suffering that he had failed to see the signs of her own struggles. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But before she could respond, the atmosphere shifted again, a palpable tension crackling in the air. Lila's expression hardened, and for a brief moment, he saw something in her eyes that sent a chill down his spine. A flicker of something dark, something hidden. "Brad," she said slowly, her voice low, "there's something you need to know." "What is it?" he asked, his heart pounding. "What are you hiding?" She took a step back, her gaze darting to the door as if weighing her options. "I didn't come here just to check on you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I came because I've been looking for you. For a long time." "What do you mean?" he pressed, confusion swirling in his mind. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you," she said, her voice breaking. "But there's more to this than you realize. I've been searching for you because I need you to understand the truth." "What truth?" he demanded, frustration boiling over. "Just tell me." Lila took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not who you think I am, Brad. I'm not just some girl who wandered into your life. I'm connected to your past in ways you can't even begin to imagine." His heart sank, a sense of dread washing over him. "What do you mean?" "I was there the night everything fell apart for you," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I saw it happen. I saw you lose everything.